is Craig Biddle. Oh, we're starting the recording now. Give me one sec. All right, I'm going to start again since I just heard the recording is starting, and it looks like we've got over 100 people at least in the participants list here, and I think I'll go ahead and start with preliminaries. My name is Craig Biddle. I'm the editor of the Objective Standard, a journal of philosophy and culture written from an objectivist perspective. That's the philosophy of Ayn Rand that you've been hearing some about from Dr. Daniels and others in this series. I also am the director of education at Objective Standard Institute, which is an educational organization that teaches people, mostly young people like you all, about philosophy, and particularly objectivism and philosophy for living and loving life is the way that we often put it. So useful philosophy. Now I see a note here that says, I see him, but nothing else. I think you're only supposed to see me. At this point, I don't think that the whole field is going to populate. So, by the way, another aspect of the preliminaries here, let me point out, we have two different places where you can post notes. There's a chat and there's a Q&A. You guys can chat among yourselves in the chat. I'm not going to be keeping an eye on that, and nor is Grace, who is helping me to host this. But she will keep her eye on the Q&A, and you guys are welcome to ask any questions pertaining to the discussion tonight. And we're going to have a nice long Q&A, so feel free to use that Q&A area for that. I personally will not be looking in there because I can't deliver a talk and pay attention to a Q&A or even the chat at the same time, so bear with me on that. But if you have questions, please put them in there, and Grace will read them to me at the end. During the Q&A, I'll answer any questions you have then. So back to my work. So I edit the Objective Standard, and I teach courses at Objective Standard Institute. I'm also the author of a few books, one of which is titled, not coincidentally, Loving Life. And that, of course, is our topic tonight, loving life and choosing virtue. And so I know Dr. Daniels last week gave you guys a nice sort of primer on the history of the idea of self-interest. You learned a little bit about the advocates of this idea and the critics of this idea. And then you heard how Ayn Rand discussed this idea and what her views were on this. And ultimately, you learned that Rand tied the whole idea of morality and values and why we need these things down to the root of all of that, which is life. Human life is the very reason that we need values to begin with. Values are precisely, just thinking in terms of biology, they're the objects of actions that living organisms take to gain and keep so that they can remain in existence, so that they can remain alive. And this is just a very scientific, biologically oriented view of what values are. But it really is these are the facts that give rise to the very need of the concept of value. Like either we need values or we don't. And if we need them, then the reason that we need them is going to tell us which values are good and which values are bad. And that's right where you're going to find your standard. Now, I'm not going to rehash what Dr. Daniels discussed last week, because I know Eric, and he's a good friend of mine, and I know he did a really good job sort of laying that groundwork. And so you've got the history and you've got something of the theory on this. Today, what I want to talk about is the practical implications of this idea that life is the standard of value, and that your life, since you're the organism, you're the living thing acting to gain and keep the values for you, that your life is the purpose of your value pursuits, making your life great, keeping yourself in existence and thriving. And this is Rand's view of what values are about and what morality is all about. So I want to start just with a hypothetical. Consider a young girl who wants to be a software engineer. Maybe she's your age, she's getting ready to graduate from high school, and she wants with all of her soul to be an excellent software engineer. She just loves this field. She wants to be creative in the field. She wants to develop amazing new softwares and make a career out of this. Well, in order to do this, she has to really commit herself to this aim. She's got to be conscious about how she spends her time and her energy, and she's got to use her bandwidth, correctly. She's going to have to do a whole lot of studying. She's going to have to write a lot of code. It's important for her to engage and network with certain kinds of people who think at a high level in this area. She really needs to take this seriously. This is a big goal, right? But suppose she also accepts the idea that being moral consists in self-sacrificially serving other people, right? This is sort of the traditional view nowadays about what being moral means. It means selflessly serving others, right? And if you're going after your own gain, you're being selfish, and that's immoral. But if you're selflessly serving others, if you're sacrificially serving others, that's good. So as long as you're not getting gains, that's the thing. So this young girl has two conflicting goals here, or two conflicting premises, I should say. She's got her goal, which is to make her life awesome and to go pursue this wonderful career that will fill her life with joy that she just is fascinated by. And she's got a moral code that says, well, you can't just go out there and do things that are in your self-interest and that's it. You have to sacrifice for other people. That's what it means to be moral. Well, what's going to happen if this girl simultaneously wants to pursue this very difficult, complex, long-range goal, and she's accepting this moral code that really undermines that? Well, you can take it either way. If she pursues that goal full bore and just says, well, I know being moral means sacrificing for other people. So when my friends ask me to go out and I really know that I need to work, I know I should go out with them because that's for them and not for me, but I really want to go do this thing. Or, if your family's asking you to come away for the weekend to go have some fun with them and they really want you to come, but you know that you need to focus on your craft if you're the girl. And so she's conflicted, but she decides to go for the career. And she says, look, I'm going to forget about this moral stuff. I'm just going to pursue my own values. Well, what happens to her then? What happens internally when you act in a way that is contrary to the moral code that you've accepted? Guilt arises, right? And guilt is really one of the most pernicious emotions in human life. It just can eat away at your soul. And so that's one alternative, is that the girl accepts this code of morality that, really she should be serving soup in soup kitchens on the weekend, or at least, doing what her friends want her to do rather than what she wants to do. But instead, she's going to go and pursue her goals full bore. The conflict there arises or manifests with a whole lot of guilt. If she goes the other way, if she says, well, I know that's what I really want to do. I want to have this marvelous, successful career in this field that I love. But, that would just be selfish to go, put all of my time and energy into that and just ignore, what my friends want, what my parents want, what society expects of me, the poor people down in the soup kitchen line and so on. So I'm gonna compromise on my goals, and I'm gonna put some time into this moral thing, and I'm gonna be moral as well. Well, what happens then? She does not live the full life that she could have lived. It's just that simple. She's going to live some kind of a mitigated version of what the beautiful life that she could live is. And there's no getting around this fact, right? If your moral code consists of the idea that you should give up your life-serving values for other people rather than pursue your life-serving values for yourself, then you're going to have this conflict one way or the other. You're either going to feel guilt for pursuing your values, or you're going to give up on some of your pursuits in order to be, quote, moral. And either way, you're going to have a less than ideal life. So you see the problem here. Well, Ayn Rand's approach to morality solves this problem, because she just challenges this idea that sacrifice is good. this whole premise that being moral consists in selflessly serving other people is really baseless. There's no reason why you should give up your values for other people any more than there's reason they should give up their values for you. What good is giving up human values? It doesn't make sense. What human beings need to do if we want to live and flourish is precisely the opposite. We need to pursue our values and not give them up. And this is the genius of Rand's approach to ethics. Now, let me put a big exclamation point here, because I'm not here to sell you on Ayn Rand's ethics per se. I want you to understand what they are. I know Dr. Daniels helped you to understand sort of where they fit in historically and how Rand arrived at this idea that life is the standard of value. And my goal is to talk about the practical implications of this in your life. So I'm just going to try to paint for you an accurate picture of what Rand's views are on this, so that you can think about them for yourself. But I obviously agree with her ideas, and so it may sound like there's some advocacy in here, but that's not really my intention. My intention is for you to understand these ideas so that you can make your own decision about whether you think they make sense. So Rand's view is that there's this false alternative that we've been raised with in America and certainly other places around the world, and that is that, well, you got to sacrifice one way or another. Either you sacrifice for other people or you sacrifice them to you, right? So it's either altruism, the traditional morality, or predation. You're just going to prey on other people and treat them horribly to get what you want. And Rand says this is a false alternative. What about a non-sacrificial morality? What about the idea that human sacrifice as such is just bad? That it's wrong to sacrifice human beings, that we shouldn't do it in either direction, self to others or others to self. And this is her view. And she says instead, everyone should pursue his or her life-serving values so that each person can live a wonderful life and can voluntarily engage with other people when they have ideas and values and aims in common. And they can also say, hey, I want to go my own way and I'm not interested in working with you if they don't want to work with other people. And so we're going to flesh out some of these ideas just in terms of the way that this works in practice. But I want to say right at this juncture that you can see already that the title of this talk tonight, Loving Life and Choosing Virtue, there's no dichotomy here. There's no contradiction between these two things. Indeed, they're essentially two sides of the same coin. Loving life, well, this is the thing we want to do, right? You want to love your life. You want to have a big, robust, wonderful life full of joy, pursuing the values that you want to pursue, engaging in wonderful relationships with good people who fill your life with meaning and joy, engaging in wonderful recreational activities, whether golf or rock climbing or sailing or whatever you love, Dungeons and Dragons, right? Whatever it is. This is what a good life consists of, is pursuing your values. And Rand says this is precisely what we should all do. Pursue your values, engage with others voluntarily, and recognize their rights to pursue their values. So it's just a big win-win, harmonious view of the way that human beings should engage. And so I was pointing out that there's two sides of the same coin here. You've got loving life, the aim, and then choosing virtue. Well, in Rand's view, what is virtue? Virtue is precisely the actions, the principled actions that you must take in order to live as a human being and thrive. The principled actions that you must take in order to live as a human being and thrive. Now, I know Dr. Daniels gave you sort of this groundwork about life being the standard of value, and you should pursue the values that are necessary to your life. Well, Rand points out that there are several fundamental kinds of actions that we absolutely have to take if we want to live and prosper. And we'll get to those in a minute. But I want to talk first about actually three values that Rand identifies that are universal values that everyone who is a human being needs. And then we're going to talk about optional values or personal values, which also are a huge part of Rand's ideas here. So we are very complex beings, and we live for many decades. You guys could live for well over 100 years. And you have all sorts of complexity going on in your lives, right? Just think about what's going on in your head, right? There's a whole lot going on in there. You've got all sorts of emotions, you've got all sorts of ideas, you have your mind is thinking all the time about various things. It's complex in there, right? And then you have not only all of those things going on inside your head, you've got everything going on outside of your life. You've got the various relationships, you've got school, you've got possibly college or whatever career you're going to go into, and all of this is just one huge project. And if you think about how big a project living a great life is, take any aspect of life that's complex, whether it's brain surgery or writing a symphony or writing some computer code, right? And that can be really complex, but that is just one piece, one relatively small piece of a full life for the person who's doing that, right? Living a full, totally engaged, really meaningful life for many decades is a massive project, right? So what we need to do in order to live fully as human beings, we need to account for the actual values that are essential to that goal. And Rand identifies three. And I want you to observe that these are all spiritual values. All of these are spiritual values, meaning that they're values of the mind. The first, unsurprisingly, given what Eric talked to you guys about last week, is reason, right? You have a rational faculty, you have a mind, you're using it right now to listen to me and try to assess whether what I'm saying is making sense. And you hopefully are being very critical and saying, well, this better make sense or I'm not going to accept it, because that's always how you should approach things. But that faculty is called reason. And it is your means of knowledge. It's your only means of understanding this world, right? You look at reality and you take data in using your five senses and you conceptualize that data, cat, dog, and then you conceptualize a broader abstraction on that animal and so forth. And this is how we form concepts and use concepts to think. It's a rational faculty that makes this possible. Also in your mind, however, are emotions. And right, or not in your mind, but in your body and in your mind, it's sort of a two-part thing, emotions, because they have a very bodily effect on us as well, right? When you get really angry and you feel it through your entire body. But your emotions are another aspect of your spiritual life. And so I want to say just a quick word on the relationship between emotions and reason. Reason is your means of knowledge. It's your means of understanding the world. And emotions are your automatic consequences of the ideas that you have in relation to things that happen to you in life. So you can think of them as they are the psychological means of experiencing your values. I'll give a quick example. If you love a particular football team and they're playing against their big rival, and you're watching the game and you're really excited because your team is winning, and then lo and behold, they win, you feel elated. You feel emotions of joy. Why? Because you value this team and the thing that happened has this relationship to your values, and it gives rise to a positive emotion. Likewise, if your team loses, then you feel negative emotions, again, because you value something, and this action in relation to that, or your value in relation to the event, gives you a negative emotion because you wanted something to happen and it didn't, right? And you can multiply these kinds of examples, right? If you ask out a girl or a guy and he says yes, you have the positive emotion. If not, you get the negative. Or if you apply for the job and you get it, you have the positive emotion. So you can see the relationship between reason and emotion is that they're very different things, but they're also both very important in life. So reason is your means of knowledge, and Rand holds that as absolutely essential to understand, because this is how you're going to use your mind to navigate this world and figure out how to live well. Your emotions are important, but they're just a different thing. So you can think of it as being, you should be pro-reason and pro-emotion, just treat them both as the faculty that they actually are. And also, in terms of spiritual values, you have the need of purpose in your life. You in order to live a wonderful life, you actually have to set goals and you have to pursue important things that are important to you, whether it's an education, whether it's a career, it might be a relationship is a purposeful activity. You meet some guy or some girl and you say, hey, I want to make this relationship work. So those are purposes in your life. And it's another spiritual value that Rand says is absolutely essential to a good life. And I think you can see that it is. If you don't have any goals in life, you're not going to be motivated to take any actions, and you're not going to make much of your days. And then the third important spiritual value that Rand talks about is self-esteem. And self-esteem is actually something that arises from using reason and pursuing purposes, if you think about it. So when you use your mind and you go after values in life, you go after the things that matter to you, and you achieve some of those values, you don't necessarily achieve all of them, the emotional response to that is that you feel self-esteem, which really has two parts. You feel capable of dealing with the world because you've seen that you can. You've sort of proven to yourself, hey, I can do this thing. I can be efficacious. I can make things happen. And the other part of self-esteem is self-respect. You say to yourself, in effect, hey, I'm worthy of success and happiness because I put out the effort. I actually made an effort. And so I deserve the kinds of results that I'm getting because I made the effort to succeed. So these are the three key values that Rand says are universal values that every one of us needs in order to live. Now we're going to talk about virtues as well, but first I want to talk about the relationship between these universal values, okay? Universal values meaning all of us need these. Everyone needs to use reason. Everyone needs to pursue purposes. Everyone needs self-esteem. There's no question. If you don't have any self-esteem, if you think that you're incapable of dealing with this world, or that you don't deserve success, you're not going to find yourself able to live successfully in this world, and you're not even going to feel happy, because self-esteem is like a key ingredient of happiness. But then there are optional values, because we're not all the same. And it's very important to understand the difference between universal values and optional values. So the areas in life where we have optional values are myriad, but I'll name a few that are pretty obvious. Career. There are a zillion options out there for the career you might choose. You might want to be a doctor. You might want to be a gardener. You might want to be an actor, right? These are all legitimate optional values because they're things that actually engage your mind and bring value to your life and to other people. So you can actually trade them in the marketplace. Friendships. You might be friends with someone that he or she might not appreciate, and that's fine. Friendships are an optional aspect, or at least your particular friends are optional within your life. So there's no dogmatism in this philosophy. Nobody's saying you have to do this or you have to do that. We're saying that if you want to live a wonderful life, you've got to take seriously the requirements of life. Reason, purpose, self-esteem are essential. Friendships and career are essential too, but there's a huge, broad array of options within those particular categories. Likewise for recreation. You might like golf, you might like playing Dungeons and Dragons, you might like bowling, whatever it is that works for you. These are all your optional values. Romantic partner, optional for you. You might like people who are super intellectual and into the arts. You might like people who are super athletic or whatever, and that's where you're more likely then to find a romantic partner for yourself. So there are two different kinds of values. There are the values you absolutely need to live as a human being just by the nature of the kind of animal that you are. And then there are the optional values, the values that you need in order to live, but that there's just huge range of alternatives within these categories. Now, how do you go after these values most efficaciously? How do you go after the values that will fill your life with joy? And this is where Rand talks about various virtues. So again, the title of this talk is loving life and choosing virtue. here we get to virtue, because we know that we want to live this beautiful life. The question is, what are the actions that we must take in order to use our minds well, to pursue our purposes, to gain self-esteem? What are the actions we must take to build a wonderful career that we love, to engage in great relationships, to enjoy our recreational activities and our hobbies and art or whatever we might enjoy? And Rand is very scientific about this too. She just turns to reality and says, well, we live in a causal environment, right? This world operates on the law of cause and effect. If you want to achieve a goal, you must enact the cause to achieve that goal. And this is what all of her virtues are all about. So I'll take them one at a time. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I think you'll see a pattern here that's pretty clear. Her first virtue, unsurprisingly, is rationality. You should accept reason as your only means of knowledge and your only judge of values and your only guide to action. This doesn't mean that you ignore your emotions. It means that your emotions, as I said earlier, you treat them as what they are. They're your psychological means of experiencing your values. They're not your means of understanding what's true or good or what will make your life great. So rationality is simply committing to using your mind to make decisions about what's true, false, right, wrong, and how you should and shouldn't act. She has another virtue she calls productiveness. And this is just the idea that in order to live, you have to produce. You've got to produce the values on which your life and happiness depend, so that you can either consume them yourself or trade them with others in the marketplace, right? I happen to teach for a living and write for a living, so I get paid for that, and that enables me to go out and buy iPhones and homes or whatever else I need. And that's how productiveness obviously works in a marketplace. You don't have to produce everything, but you've got to produce something, because the only alternative would be to live as a parasite on other people, which is not something that is not conducive to a wonderful life. Our productive career in life is one of the main means of purpose and meaning. So this goes back to the value of purpose. We need to have goals and challenges in life. That's what, accomplishing difficult goals and overcoming challenges is one of the things that fills our lives with meaning. So purpose and productiveness sort of go hand in hand there. Honesty is another virtue that Rand talks about, and that is just the refusal to fake reality, the refusal to pretend that facts are other than they are. Of course, this is important. Why? Because values come from reality. If you want to achieve values in this life, in this reality that we live in, you've got to keep your mind connected to that reality. And if you pretend that, I don't really have to get up and go to work every morning, somehow, manna will fall from the sky and enable me to live without being productive, your life isn't going to go well, right? You need to keep your mind connected to reality and realize, no, the way that this world works is you've got to work and produce. And likewise for relationships. If you have a friend who is abusive to you, or a lover who's abusive to you, and you pretend that that's not happening, that's going to be destructive to your life. Whereas if you judge accordingly, judge people on the basis of the actual facts, and be honest with yourself about what's going on, then you can live a better life. And that brings us to another virtue, which is the virtue of justice that Rand talks about. There's a popular saying in religion, judge not that ye be not judged. And Rand says, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. You should judge and be prepared to be judged. And this doesn't mean harshness. This means judge people on the facts. What you want to have good relationships with people, so you need to figure out what people actually do, what they say, how they act, because judging them on the basis of that is how you determine whether somebody should be a friend or a business partner, or whether you should vote for a politician, right? So judgment is essential to human life, and justice is the virtue of judging people in accordance with the relevant facts and treating them as they deserve to be treated. So Rand has several more virtues, but you can see how all of them are basically versions of act on your best judgment, use your mind, focus on reality, determine what you really do need to do to live a beautiful life, and then act that way as a matter of principle. So these are the essence. This is sort of the core of the actionable elements of Ayn Rand's philosophy. She's saying, in effect, look, you're a certain kind of animal. You've got this rational faculty. It is your means of knowledge. It is your basic means of living. Use it. You do have emotions. They're very important. Don't treat them as unimportant, but don't ever pretend that they're your means of knowledge. Just because you feel that something is true doesn't mean that it's true. The only way you can know if something is true is by assessing the facts and weighing the evidence on things. And that's what your rational faculty does. And then, take the actions necessary once you have your values, take the actions necessary to achieve them. And that's the essence of the relationship of the values, universal values, your optional values, your career, your friendships, the people you want to hang out with, that kind of stuff. And then the actions that you must take in order to build a beautiful life on the basis of those values. So now I want to talk a little bit about what I think is one of the most interesting aspects of Rand's philosophy. And this is just an aspect really of the virtues. It's just taking the virtues seriously. And that's this. In order to live a beautiful life, you've got to take your values seriously, and you have to prioritize them in accordance with their relative importance, right? So put this negatively. It's not the case that all of the values in your life are equally important to you, right? Some values are super important, like your career, your romantic relationships, your favorite recreational activities. These things may be really important to you. Whereas, a night on the town with your friends, or going bowling, if it's not something that you're particularly fond of, or just an ice cream cone, right, is not an enormous value. It can be a value, it may be a value, but it's not the same thing as these big values in your life. And one of the things that Rand points out is that to live a wonderful life, you've actually got to take this hierarchy of values seriously. You've got to realize that the most important values in your life should be treated just that way, as the most important values. So she advocates, and I advocate, that you think really, really seriously about what is most important in your life, not for other people, for you. What is most important in your life that will fill your years and your life with meaning and joy. Now, this is going to change. My most important values. I've changed careers at least twice, and arguably 3 times. And I've changed hobbies multiple times, and I've had different friends throughout the course of my life, and I've had a couple of different romantic relationships in my life, or more than a couple, but a couple of different serious ones. And it is the case that your values will change over time. But at any stage in your life, if you really want to make the most of your life, you've got to say, what's most important to me now? And the best way to think about this is to do it on paper, or on your computer, or your iPhone, or whatever you want to use, but write it down. Take your values seriously. Say, look, I want to be, I mentioned in the opening example about a young girl who wants to be a software engineer. You can take any other thing. It could be a painter. I want to be a sculptor. I want to be an actor. I want to be a lawyer, whatever it is. So within your career, put that down on paper and say to yourself, look, what do I need to do in order to pursue this value? And take it seriously. And then get your other values in order. If you have a relationship, put that person down on the paper and say, how much time and how much energy do I want to put into this relationship? And if you've got hobbies that are really important to you, put those down. And once you get this isn't going to be a long list. It's probably going to be a relatively short list, because the most important things in your life, if you think about this seriously, are not in the multitudes. They're relatively short or relatively low in number. But once you get these down, then you can implement what Rand calls a teleological measurement, which is a fancy word for just making decisions about your life and about what actions you want to take with respect to the hierarchy of your values, with respect to the relative importance of your values. She gives an example, and she says that people do this all the time with money, right? When you spend money on something, you're spending that money on one object means that you can't spend it elsewhere. So you're basically weighing the value of this thing you want to buy with the money against every other alternative use of that money, right? And when you are doing this with other decisions in your life that aren't monetary, what you're using instead of money, you're trading time. You're trading time. How much time do I want to put into these activities? And in order to make those decisions well, you've got to know what's most important to you. And this is why she talks about the importance of hierarchizing your values. And not many people do this. It sounds like kind of an obvious thing that we should do when you hear it. But frankly, not a lot of people think this deeply and this specifically about their values and what they can do to make their lives wonderful. And the thing is, you live once. So if you do this, you're going to have a very different life than if you don't do this, right? If you're just sort of meandering your way through life and making decisions without knowing what really matters most to you, you're going to live a very different life than if you get your values in order and you pursue those values with rigor and with intention. So you can think of it this way too. Once you have your hierarchy of values, once you know what's most important to you at any given time, adhering to that hierarchy is simply a matter of upholding the virtue of integrity. You're saying, these are my values, and I'm going to pursue them accordingly. And this brings me to the last point that I want to make before we have a Q&A, and that is that once you have your values hierarchized, once you know what you want to do in life and what's most important to you, you can think of this in two ways. You can say, all right, then the principle becomes always act in accordance with your value hierarchy. Always act in accordance with what matters most to you. That's upholding the virtue of integrity. Putting it negatively, I would say, never surrender a greater value for the sake of a lesser value. Never surrender, never give up a greater value, your career, your romantic relationship, your friendships, these big values, never give them up for the sake of something less important. So I'll concretize this. I mentioned earlier, if a girl wants to pursue a career as a software developer, and her friends are saying, "Hey, come out tonight. We're going to go dancing or whatever." The girl has an alternative. If she's got some big project she's got to get done, tonight in order to either get the client or finish some big thing at work, she can either focus on that big value, or she can sacrifice that value to a lesser value, a night on the town with her friends. And we engage in these kinds of alternatives all the time in life. So when you, let's say you want to go away with friends for a weekend because they're heading down to the beach this summer for a weekend. And your family says, well, we were going to have a family get together and we'd really like you to join us for that. Well, you have a decision to make here. What matters more to you at this time in your life, given your values? Is a weekend at the beach with your friends more important? If it is, you need to know that so you can make that decision really clearly and know that, what, mom and dad, I'm not coming with you guys this weekend because I want to do this other thing. But if you haven't hierarchized your values, if you haven't decided for yourself which values you think are most important and really made that firm decision, then you don't know how to make those decisions. You literally just find yourself, in effect, flipping coins and making decisions in life. And that is no way to live a wonderful life. So lastly, I want to give you guys a 30-day challenge with these ideas, because either you need philosophy or you don't. And in my view, the whole point of thinking philosophically is to put this stuff to use. This is not just pie in the sky. We're trying to figure out how to make our lives wonderful. And I think Rand's ideas here are really good. Take your values seriously. Know what your most important values are. Your mind is really your most important value. Your purposes in life, your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself based on how you act. Those are the big ones. Those are universals. your optional values, the career you want, all of that stuff, figure out what that is, then hierarchize them and act on it. And the 30-day challenge is to do just that. You do this on paper. Think through your values, write down what's most important to you. Once you've got the things that you think are most important, think out loud to yourself or on paper to yourself, or talk with a friend about it if you have a friend who would engage in this with you, and say, how can I arrange my life so that I can put the most time and the most quality time into these things? Now, this does not mean you don't take relaxation time, or just go, hit the town with your friends in the evening. Relaxation is an important part of life, but it's not the same thing as your career, right? So you just want to get those things into relative, get those relationships clear in your mind so that you know how much time to apportion to one thing versus another. And after you've got these things figured out, for 30 days, just try to live consistent with that hierarchy. Just try to live absolutely consistently with that hierarchy and see what happens. See what you think about this as a philosophic approach to living a wonderful life. I think what you're going to find is that it's really effective. It sounds simple. In a sense, it is simple, but the big thing is that it's your life. You live once, and this is not a game. It's not. This isn't a trial run. This is the one-time thing. And if you do this and you enjoy it, if this 30-day trial works for you, I think you'll find that looking further into these ideas and really taking a philosophical approach to making your life wonderful is well worth your time and your effort. So what we can see in Rand's ideas is that loving life and choosing virtue are just two sides of the same coin. This is a means-end relationship. You want a beautiful life? Good. Follow the virtues, pursue the values that are necessary to achieve that end. And all else being equal, you'll live a beautiful life. All right, we've got lots of time for Q&A here. So I'm going to see whether Grace has any questions going. It seems there's some going on in the chat, and I've got a few. Okay, I'll go ahead and read these if I don't hear Grace chiming in, but this is fine because I can read these. How do we block out negatively from people around us pushing us to do something we don't want to do? So that's a really good question. You're going to engage with people for a long time, and a lot of people are going to want you to do things that you don't want to do, and you need to be very clear in your own mind about what you want so that you can stand firm. So the first thing is, if you don't know what your values are, then you're not going to know whether you should do what they want you to do or not do what they want you to do, because you haven't decided yourself what your values are. So the first thing I would say in answer to that is get clear on your own values. And then if people are pushing you to do things that you don't want to do, explain to them. I mean, presumably these are friends. And if they're friends, then maybe they deserve an explanation. Say, look, I don't want to do that. I've decided that I want to achieve these goals in my life, and I'm going to put my time here. And if they keep, harassing you and trying to get you to do things that you've already explained that you don't want to do, those people are probably not good to keep as friends, at least not the kinds of friends that you're going to hang out with regularly. The people you engage with in life have a major impact on who you become. I don't buy into the thing you hear some people say sometimes, who you are depends on the 5 people you hang out with. That's not really true. Who you are depends on a whole lot more than that. It depends on how you use your mind generally. But it is true that the people you choose to spend time with have an effect on who you become, and it's not a trivial effect. So don't hang out with people that are bad for your life, right? I mean, this is obvious when we think about an abusive spouse or something like that, right? If somebody's being physically or even psychologically abusive to somebody, you say, hey, get out of that relationship, right? And it's pretty clear in those cases that that's what you should do. But the fact is, you shouldn't be in relationships with people who are not in your best interest generally at all, because there are too many other options for relationships out there with really good people who would be really good for your life. So judge people this goes to the virtue of justice. Judge people in accordance with what they actually say and do, and whether they treat you well and whether they treat others well. And hang out with people who are good. Hang out with people who are honest and just, and who also themselves are trying to live wonderful lives. You want to hang out with ambitious people. People are trying to do beautiful things in their lives. Those are the friends who will make a big difference. So I would say get away from those people if they will not cease and desist on that. What do you do if your values aren't your own? You've been told all your life what to think, say, and do. If you don't follow these values, you lose many people who are important to you, like parents. Yeah, this can be really difficult, but and the answer to this is almost the same as the answer to the prior question. And that is, look, your life belongs to you. It doesn't belong to your parents. It doesn't belong to your teachers. It doesn't belong to your friends. It doesn't belong to your preachers. It belongs to you. And this is one of the most important things you learn from Ayn Rand's philosophy and from Aristotle's philosophy, by the way. Aristotle back in ancient Greece held very similar ideas to this, right? Your mind, and you need to judge people and act in accordance with your own conclusions. So if you've been raised in a family where people have sort of told you what you have to believe and what you have to do and what you have to think, you've got a little bit of struggle to get out of that. That's not easy. But the place to begin is to try to commit yourself right away to figuring out what you really want in life, what matters to you, what will fill your life with joy. That's the first thing you've got to start thinking about. Now, we're not born knowing what's going to fill our life with joy. You learn these things by experimenting, by going out and trying things. So if you're around people who are sort of being dogmatic about how you should live and trying to get you to fit into their boxes, get away from those people, including if it's your family. Get away from them to the extent that you can, and hang out with other people. Find people who are not treating you that way. Find people who are willing to say, hey, you've got your own values. I'd love to hear what they are. And I'd love to, see you pursue your values just like I pursue mine. So you've really got to just make a conscious decision that you're going to make a move here and get away from anyone who's just really negative in your life. And that unfortunately can include family. You don't have to break entirely with family members who are this way. You can just say to them, look, I know you have strong ideas about what I should be doing, and you've told me, all my life how I should act. But I'm 17 now, or however old you are, and I'm thinking on my own, and I'm going to make some of my own decisions starting now. I welcome your input. I'll take your views on things, and I'll weigh that in my own mind. But I'm going to make my own decisions about my life based on my own thinking, and you got to commit to that. I really recommend that you study some of the philosophy I've been talking about. Read Ayn Rand's book, The Virtue of Selfishness. My book, Loving Life, The Morality of Self-Interest and the Facts That Support It, has a lot of sort of guidance for these kinds of things in it. But you have to now develop your own independent philosophy. And that philosophy, I think, should be a philosophy based on the idea that your life belongs to you and that your mind is the mind that's going to do the work to figure out how you're going to guide that life. And know it. It's great to get other people's opinions and to weigh other, particularly if they're intelligent people, and weigh their views about things. That's wonderful. But your own mind and your own thinking has got to be the final arbiter on all of this. Can you have too many important values? Well, yeah, you can, because if you try to fill your life with more values than you can actually pursue, then it just gets chaotic. And I can tell you all about this because I've done it, right? And I still wrestle with this, right? I have a lot of things that I'm trying to do in life, and sometimes I overwhelm myself with the amount of things that I'm trying to do. And all of those things I'm trying to do, those are values. This is me acting to gain and keep things, whether it's making this company work or that company work, or working or getting this vacation or this new thing we want to do with the home or whatever. So we've done some renovations on the home recently, and that really is disruptive in life. So you can overwhelm yourself with too many goals, with too many values. And this is why it's really important to take the time to sit down in a quiet place and really ask yourself, what is most important to me? And you want to get a hierarchy going so that oh, this thing really is the most important to me. I'll be personal here. So for me, the top values in my life are my career, which has multiple things going on in it, because I basically help to run 3 different companies, and I've got various employees in these companies, and then I have to do a lot of writing and a lot of teaching and a lot of marketing, and so there's just a whole lot going on there. But that's my big top value in terms of my purposes. My wife and my daughter are my other top values, and they're basically, these are both right at the top. My career, the way that I want to spend my time in my professional world, and my wife and my daughter. Those are my big values. And everything I do in life, I think in terms of how can I apportion as much time as possible to these most important things. And then I have a few hobbies I love. I love skiing. I love rock climbing. My wife and I love ballroom dancing. We met ballroom dancing, and we also love country western dancing. So we try to make time for those kinds of things. And of late, I've had very little time for those kinds of things because I'm very busy. And then there are a bunch of lesser values. Like I love to listen to music, but I don't do that as much as I used to. The art that I like to consume now, I love movies, and there are a few television series that I love. Ted Lasso is my latest, most loved television show. So, that gives you an idea of sort of the hierarchy of my values. I would never sit down to watch some TV if I knew that I really needed to be doing something else to shore up my relationship with my wife, or to make sure that I got the right things done for work. So you see how the hierarchy works. And it's not, hierarchy is a bit of a dangerous term, because it's not like everything is in some kind of a linear order. But there is a sense in which, and I think you can internalize this in your own mind, there is a sense in which certain values in your life are just more important than the others. And you want to be explicit about that in your own mind and get it down on paper. And that way you won't overwhelm yourself. So I'm not sure what you, I hope I answered that question in terms of, having too many big values. Let me paint a picture to see if this is more what you might mean. Maybe you have like 7 best friends who all require enormous amounts of time, and you're working 2 different jobs, and you're also trying to engage in several recreational activities as well. You're running marathons, and you're playing tennis, and you're doing a few other things, right? And if you're treating all of these as sort of equally important values, that's just going to blow up. There's only 24 hours in a day, right? And you just can't do all of that. So I assume that that's what you mean in this question. And if that's the case, you really have to say, you know what? I can't handle treating 7 people as best friends. Which of these friends really matter the most to me, and which am I willing selfishly to give, real time to? And then the other ones, you just have to establish a different kind of relationship with them. Likewise for the various hobbies that are if you're trying to treat too many hobbies as equally important. So think through it, and I think you'll see that if you do think through it and really take some time, you'll find you can find some differences and say, this one's really more important than those others. What text? Let's see. Oh, these questions are coming in. So I'm not answering these in order here. This is a little confusing for me. All right, I'm going to start at the top here. Well, we have to use what we've gathered from here and use it for the next webinar encounter. not sure what that means. I advocate that you use what's here. I'm not sure whether you have another. I don't think you have to do my 30-day challenge for that. That's just me telling you. You have too many important values. Answered that. What texts did you consult while preparing for this? I didn't consult any texts while preparing for this because I've been teaching about these ideas for a long time and I know them well. So I don't even have notes for this. I'm just talking to you about what I think makes sense given the topic that we have here. But I'll tell you texts that I recommend. I recommend Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy, Who Needs It? Very, very important book that gives you a good indication about what good philosophy should be. If philosophy is just pie in the sky stuff in an ivory tower, it's of no use. And if it's of no use, you don't need it. Just throw it away and don't do that thing. Philosophy should be a guide to how to think clearly and pursue your goals well and efficaciously. And if any philosophy that's not helping you to do that, I think is fake philosophy. It's just not, it's not worth your time or effort. Ayn Rand's book, the Virtue of Selfishness, is another book that I highly recommend. And as an introduction to these ideas, I'll recommend my own book again, Loving Life, The Morality of Self-Interest and Effects That Support It. I think you'll find that it's very short and it's got a whole lot of examples in it, which I think will help you to understand these ideas more clearly and deeply. Do you think that if young people did the 30-day challenge and in some cases used it permanently in their life, it would help them struggle less in college along with other responsibilities? Absolutely. There's no question that if you take your values seriously and think through them and then start acting in accordance with that hierarchy. So you stop committing sacrifices in your life. You stop giving up greater values for the sake of lesser values, and you only go after the things that are most important to you. And again, it doesn't mean you don't have relaxation. You go down to the beach and or go for a hike or whatever. These are important things: winding down, rejuvenating, relaxing. All of those things are important values in life. So nothing I'm saying is to say, oh, you should never do that and you should only always be working or engaging in your romantic relationship. No, the other things are important too, but they hold a different weight in their relevance to a wonderful life. And that's what you want to get clear on, is what is that weight. But yeah, if you take your values seriously, hierarchize them, and then really act with integrity in terms of those values, your life is going to be, all else being equal, your life's going to be wonderful. Now, catastrophes can happen in life, right? You can, I had a wonderful friend get cancer and die, and that can happen. But setting aside calamities and things like that, we live in a causal environment, and if you get serious about enacting the causes that are necessary to achieve your values in life, your life's going to be great. You'll have ups and downs. There's always ups and downs in life, but the general trajectory is going to go upward, just like the stock market basically does. So, yeah, I would definitely do that. How long have you lived by these philosophies? I discovered Ayn Rand when I was about 29, and I'm now 59. So, I've been at this for a few decades, and it has made a huge difference in my life. And one of the wonderful things about Rand's ideas that you'll see when you really start to study her is there's no dogma here. Nobody's saying you have to do this or you have to do that, or you're not. It's all about the law of cause and effect. It's all, if you want to achieve these kinds of goals in life, then you have to take seriously the means of achieving them. It's all about means ends relationships. And I think if you read her ideas at your age, by the time you get to my age, you will have lived the first half of a wonderful life, and then you'll have a whole nother 59 years to go. So yeah, I strongly recommend that you start thinking a lot about this. And I'll say this too: read Ayn Rand and every other author that you read critically. Don't read just, it's not just because Ayn Rand said something doesn't make it true. It should make sense to you. And if ideas don't make sense to you, don't accept them. That would be wrong. It would be It would be a breach of your own integrity and your own independence. And Rand is really adamant about this too. She's the first to say, don't accept my ideas if you don't think they're true. But I think you'll see that they really do make sense if you start to look at them. And if you do think they make sense, I think you'll use them very, very effectively in your life. In regard to Ayn Rand's, let's see. In regard to Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, which would be more important to someone's life, happiness or meaning that sustains you through life? That's a great question. So Rand's view of meaning in life and of happiness are not at odds. These actually dovetail beautifully together. So she describes happiness as the state of consciousness that arises from the state of consciousness that arises from the achievement of one's values. And you can see this in your life. Like if you want the job and you get the job, you feel some degree of joy. And if you want the girl and get the girl, and so on. And the more you do of that, the more you succeed in getting your values, the more your life fills with joy, and that amounts to happiness over time, right? Happiness is sort of like a sustained a significant amount of joy in your life. Now, it doesn't mean that there are no downers. There's always going to be downers in life, but the goal is to pursue values and achieve the values that are important to you in life. And what arises in you from that is happiness. Also, what arises with you in you from that is self-esteem. And as I mentioned, that's a key ingredient of happiness, right? So that's what happiness and self-esteem, and that's their relationship. Purpose and meaning, according to Rand's philosophy, come precisely from choosing the kinds of goals that will fill your life with meaning, right? What does meaning mean? It means that the thing in question means something to you. That's why the concept, that's why mean is the prefix there. Meaning it's meaningful. It has some meaning in your life, right? The goals that you choose, if you want to be a software engineer or if you want to be an actor, right? That kind of a purpose, that kind of a big goal in your life, that creates meaning. Once you choose that goal, now you have meaning in life. You have meaning and purpose. Your purpose is to pursue this thing. When you pursue it and you achieve it to some extent, that is a meaningful achievement. That's what it means for that to be meaningful. When people talk about purpose and meaning without being concrete about what they mean by these things, it's like, what is the meaning of life? As if there's some out there meaning that's going to rain down and give you some purpose. No, purpose comes from within. It's a decision that you make about how you want to live your life. And once you choose your purposes, meaning follows from those, because the meaningfulness of those pursuits in your life is precisely what meaning is. Let's see, in regard to how do I find good people? Go out and meet people who do things you like to do. If you like sailing, go to a sailing club. If you like dancing, go take dance lessons. Go out and meet people in the world who do things you love to do. And then, they're not all going to be good people, but a lot of good people out there. And the way you determine whether they're good is hanging out with them and getting to know them and being, and judging people. You have to judge people. It's not all negative. Judging is mostly positive. It's like, oh, wow, I spent this, I had a wonderful evening with these new friends, and they were really cool. We talked about wonderful things. They were supportive. Nobody was toxic. Nobody was being nasty. This is all judgment, right? But it's positive judgment. It's the kind of judgment that's most important. Negative judgment is important too, but if you want to meet good people, you've got to get out in this world and live. You have to go do things. So I highly recommend it. I've met a lot of people rock climbing, because I did a lot of that for a while. I've met a lot of people through dancing, because my wife and I do a lot of that. And that's how you meet. Come to philosophy conferences. My company, Objective Standard Institute, is throwing a philosophy conference this July 21. And if you're under 18, you'd have to have parental permission to come, but you could still come. And there are going to be 300 people there talking about how to make their lives great using philosophy. And go to those kinds of events. By the way, you can get a scholarship to that event, which covers your travel, your hotel, and the opening and closing banquets. So if you want information on that scholarship, go to objectivestandard.org, objectivestandard.org, and click on TOSCON, TOSCON, which is the name of the conference. And you'll see about the conference and the scholarships. And we'd love to see you there. So yeah, get out and live if you want to meet people. I heard that sometimes you have to take actions that you do not like the idea of in order to achieve a great goal. Is that generally true? And should you instead act in accordance to the boundaries of your virtues? Yeah, this is a good question, because this goes to what we call in philosophy pragmatism. Pragmatism is the idea, well, that there are no real principles, there's no real truth. You just do whatever works in the moment. So you don't have to worry about virtue or principle or any of that. Just do what works. But that doesn't work. Ironically, it doesn't work to just do what works, because you can't know what works unless you are paying attention to the causal nature of the environment that we live in, and then codifying into principles, general truths that you can use to pursue your values in life. And that's precisely what virtues are. Virtues are recognitions of facts of reality. So take the virtue of honesty. Virtue of honesty is in action, it's the refusal to fake reality. But what fact is it a recognition of? It's a recognition of the fact that there's only one reality, the one that we actually live in, the one that we're engaging in right now, the one where, if you jump off a cliff, you die, and the one if you step in front of a car, you die, and the one in which if you pursue your values and don't commit sacrifices, you'll live a good life, right? That's the reality we live in. To be dishonest is to pretend that some other reality exists, and then try to use that reality by, pretending to other people it exists. So you say to them, well, I said this when you really said something else, or I did this when I really did something else. That's dishonest. The idea that it's a lie is trivial. What it really is it's faking the reality that you live in, and it doesn't work. Why? Because there's only one reality. And if you try to pretend that there's another one, it just throws off your thinking. Wishing doesn't make it so, is the way that Rand once put this, right? So pragmatism, just trying to do what works at the moment. Hey, it would work if I robbed this bank and got away with the money, then I'd be rich. That's not the way reality works. The way reality works is that if you do something like that you did something wrong. Also, you now can't have real friends, because you're either going to lie to them by telling them you're not a robber, or you're going to befriend other dishonest criminal people, and that's not going to be a good life for you, right? So you see how this, we could talk about this for hours. You could paint a long web, a big web of how these kinds of things play out. So what we need is a principle that says, don't fake reality. Don't pretend that other people's money belongs to you when it doesn't. That's the virtue of honesty. Don't fake reality, right? So it's a good question, because it's not obvious that we need principles, but it is true that we need principles. If you want to live a wonderful life, you have to understand how this reality that we live in actually works. And principles are your means of understanding that. And now you've got to figure out which principles are true. And that's a big part of what philosophy is. Just because somebody tells you that some principle is true doesn't make it true. You've got to use your mind to figure out whether this principle is true. And again, as you study objectivism, I think you'll see more and more that the principles in this philosophy do make sense. You'll be able to make sense of them on your own. What happens if the values that you thought were important no longer feel important? That happens all the time, and it's a natural course of life. Now, hopefully you don't mean universal values like reason, purpose, self-esteem, the things that you absolutely have to use and have in order to live. But let's say you used to like certain music and now you don't care for it, or you used to like this person as a friend to hang out with a lot and now you don't. When that happens, That just means that life is dynamic, and you shift your values. I've had my values change several times. I've played different sports in life, and I've engaged with different friends in life and different hobbies, and I've had different careers. You got to allow for things to change in life. Now, you also want to think very carefully as these changes are happening about whether the changes are good for your life or bad for your life, right? That's so thinking there's no substitute for the time you have to put in to live an examined life, as Socrates put it, right? The examined life is the way that you want to live. You want to take your life seriously and look at it and constantly reevaluate what you're doing to make sure that you're still doing what is best for you. So don't get frustrated when your values change. That's a natural, normal thing. What if you get rejected from what you wanted to prioritize? I'm not sure what that means because I don't know what you mean by get rejected. Rejected by other people, or that you simply couldn't do the thing you wanted to do? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand that question. So I'll move on to another one. How do we differentiate between ideals and virtues? Is one detrimental to the other? And how do we use each of them symbolically? So I don't know what you mean by how do we use them symbolically, but let me differentiate between ideals and virtues. Ideals is the broader term. Your ideals are what you think is important, what you think is true, what you think is the right way to live, right? That this is your ideals are almost synonymous with your philosophy, right? The things you think are true. Virtues is a narrower concept. It's about the actions that you need to take to make your life wonderful. It's about the actions you need to take to make your life wonderful. And so, traditional virtues are things like, faith, love, hope, charity, things like that. And Rand is all for love. Love is very important. To love is to value something, intensely. That's a very important thing. And there's so nothing wrong there. Charity can be fine, but Rand doesn't regard it as a virtue because it's not something that we have to do in order to live. The virtues in the objectivist view are the things that we have to do in order to live. You've got to think and use your mind. That's rationality. You've got to realize that there's only one reality and don't pretend that there's more than that. That's honesty. You've got to produce. That's productiveness. You've got to judge people rationally and treat them accordingly. That's justice. You've got to act on rational principles. That's integrity. You have to realize that your mind is the only mind that can decide for you what is true, right, false, wrong, etc. Right? And so the independence is the virtue that's contrasted with dependence or second-handedness. Rand's book titled The Fountainhead is all about the difference between what she calls a first-handed person or an independent thinker and a second-handed person or a dependent person, somebody who, instead of turning to reality to see what he or she thinks is true or what he or she thinks is good on her own, right, and using her own mind, she turns instead to other people to see what they think that she should think is true, right? And that's second-handedness. You get the idea, because you're taking other people's views to be your own. And Rand is really adamant that you shouldn't do that, right? Don't let other people dictate to you what is right, wrong, true, false, etc. Decide for yourself. Now, this, sometimes you have to rely on experts, right? I'm not a doctor, so I have to go to my doctor, and to some extent, I've got to rely on his expertise. But he has to make sense to me when he's telling me what the diagnosis is, right? If I go to my doctor and he says, oh, your spine's out of whack and we're going to hold a seance to get everything realigned, I'm running out of that doctor's office as fast as I can, right? That's that. So just because somebody's a doctor doesn't mean that whatever he says is true. But you rely on experts and you rely on your judgment, and but the final arbiter is always your judgment. So that's the virtue of independence. And all of these are actions, right? They're commitments to. Rationality is the commitment to using your mind. Honesty is the commitment to not faking reality. Justice is the commitment to judging people rationally. So that concept of a commitment, that's the action. That's what makes makes a virtue an action. You've made a decision that this is going to be your MO. You're going to live in this principled manner. And this is precisely what makes life good. When you live by principle, when you live by these virtues, your life generally goes well. Again, there's, things go wrong at times, but for the most part, if you do that, you're going to live a beautiful life. So, all right, let's see here. We are at 5:15. I'm not sure how long I'm supposed to be going, but I'm going to go for another 15 minutes. If that, Grace, interrupt me if that's not correct, please.
Absolutely right, Craig. And I will tell you that the open column of these questions here are all open questions. Everything that you have answered has been moved over to the answered column. So everything you see there is up for grabs.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. That's helpful. All right. How do we know when what we are doing is negative to us and the people around us? How do we know it affects us positively and others as well? Well, you've got to have standards, first of all, right? So when you're asking, is this affecting me negatively or positively? Well, what's the standard of value there? Your life and the requirements of your life, in my view, should be the standard, right? We are a certain kind of animal. We are an animal that lives by using our faculty of reason. So anything that compromises your mind, your rational faculty, or anything that undermines that, if somebody tells you, hey, I've got ideas that you have to accept, even though they don't make sense to you. And a lot of religions do this, right? They'll say, you've got to have faith in these ideas, even though they don't make sense. I think that's a compromise of your mind. And I don't think you should accept those ideas. I think you should say, no, I'll accept ideas when they make sense and only when they make sense, right? So when the standard is life and when rationality or your mind, the importance of your mind is your fundamental virtue, you can see in those kinds of cases that there's something detrimental there. On the other hand, thinking in terms of those same virtues, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, look, I think you should only accept ideas when they make sense to you. And I've got some ideas that I think will make sense to you. So let's talk through these together and see what you think, right? There's no threat there. That's a good thing. And then you genuinely, he's still, whether his ideas are actually good or not, you still don't know. But at least he's approaching it with respect to your cognitive faculties. He's approaching you in a way that respects your ability to think. And let me just say this with a huge exclamation point to all of you guys. You have minds and those minds work. Do not ever let anyone try to convince you that you can't figure out what's true or false in this world. You can, particularly at the philosophic level. I mean, when it comes to, higher math and, high-end physics and all of that, sure. I mean, there are certain people who can think at that level and want to think at that level. And, that's really hard. Philosophic ideas should be relatively easy for people to communicate to you. And if they can't do that, if their ideas don't make sense to you, that's a red flag, and you should be very, very cautious around those people. So you just have to have a standard, and you've got to ask yourself whether the standard hopefully is your life and your basic value is reason. And then you can determine whether a person's action is good or bad for you. If you're in a friendship and the person is really toxic and constantly using, trying to put you on guilt trips and the like, that's not good for you. So usually it's pretty clear if you have a good standard and if you're upholding independence, your own independent mind as sacrosanct. How do you find motivation? You don't find motivation. Motivation does not come to you. You generate it by taking action. Motivation actually comes after you get into something, not before. And this is really important. You're never going to get motivated. I'm a writer, all right? And I'm never like, oh, I've just got to sit down and write. No, the way that I get motivated to write is by using my mind and saying, you know what, even though you feel like procrastinating, from past history that when you sit down and start writing, you actually get into it and it's really, really fulfilling. So do that thing, right? I just use my actual rational faculty to override the procrastination or the idea that I need motivation. You don't need motivation. You need to be able to project into the future and say, hey, you know what? If I do this thing, it's really going to pay off. And sometimes the payoff is short. When I sit down to write, the payoff is pretty short. I get into it. I'm like, hey, I'm enjoying myself. I'm writing. This is great. But I don't have to feel like writing to sit down and write. Just like I don't have to feel like working out to work out, right? You work out. Why? Because you know that it's good for you. And sometimes I don't want to work out, but that's all right. Because I say, you know what? It's good for me. So I'm going to do it. So don't wait for motivation. Motivation should come after you've taken action. Action comes first. So you got to, again, get your values in order and then have integrity to those values. And I think you'll find that that's very, very helpful. Let's see. How can you push people that are detrimental to your priorities out of your life? I think I already talked about that one, so I think I'll move on. How do you handle peers, family, coworkers, and strangers who have different values and philosophy than your own? Well, the first thing I try to get clear with people on is if we're going to talk about philosophy, we have to respect each other's minds. And anyone who's not willing to respect your mind and respect the idea that ideas have to make sense, then you shouldn't even have a conversation with them. But if they're willing to do that, if they're willing to say, yeah, you know, I understand that you need things to make sense to you and I need things to make sense to me. So let's talk. And then you can have differences and you can just explain why you believe what you believe. And the other person can explain why he or she believes what they believe. And you'll typically learn from each other if you're engaging with people who are willing to think that way. Those kinds of conversations can be really fruitful. So I wouldn't run from those. The only thing I would avoid is if somebody's not open to reason, right? Your alternatives are reason or non-reason. And non-reason has a bunch of things in that bucket. There's faith. I just accept things because I just believe them. Well, what are you going to do with that? You can't reason somebody out of something if his whole premise is I don't need reason, I'm just going to go by faith, right? So I won't talk to people if they're going to say, look, I use faith as my means of knowledge. Revelation is another one, or emotions, treating emotions as a means of knowledge. I mentioned earlier that emotions are really important in life. They're your psychological means of experiencing your values. So you don't want to denigrate these things. But one way to denigrate them is to treat them as what they're not, right? Emotions are not your means of knowledge. So don't treat them as your means of knowledge. Just like reason isn't your psychological means of experiencing your values. Your emotions are that thing. So keep them separated, right? And what else is in the non-reason? Any kind of mysticism, any kind of claim to a non-rational means of knowledge. So my group believes this, so it's true. No. Group belief in things is not the standard of truth. What's the standard of truth? Your mind's ability to recognize the facts and the evidence that support an idea. That's what the standard of truth is. So, when you're talking to other people, just make sure that they're in agreement. We're going to go by reason. And it's okay if we disagree. We may disagree, that's fine, but we'll just spell out our reasoning for believing what we believe, and maybe we'll learn from each other. Let's see. What is your advice on finding motivation to pursue one's values? I already answered about motivation. You've got to take action to achieve motivation. Motivation follows action. How do you handle peers, family, coworkers, strangers who have different values? Oh, we already answered that. How do you feel about Stoicism in regards to this topic of virtues? Stoicism has a lot of interesting ideas. So this is the ancient Greek philosophers who were called the Stoics. And one of the things that the Stoics did is they did have this goal of wanting to figure out how to live well. But they have this sort of negative approach to it, and that is that you should avoid having too many values because it's just too painful to lose those values. So the best way to live is to not get too committed to anything. And look, I'm not going to beat up on the Stoics. This was well over 2,000 years ago, and they were trying to figure out things philosophically, and they didn't have Ayn Rand and all of the knowledge that we have today in philosophy. So I'm not going to shake a stick at them and say, well, they got these things wrong. I think that there's some really interesting ideas in the writings of the Stoics. What is the guy's name who's done a whole lot of writing? Ryan Holiday has written a few books, I think, on the Stoics, sort of a rebirth of Stoicism, and he gets into their ideas sort of with a modern spin on them, and they're worth reading. But here's the great thing about Rand in regard to, or in relation to, Stoicism. Stoicism has this sort of negative, avoid pain kind of approach to philosophy, and Rand's philosophy is pursue values, right? And it's just much more positive, and it's got this, and there's a big difference in that difference. Look, pain is no good. You want to avoid pain when, to the extent that you can. But if your whole philosophy is about avoiding pain or avoiding frustration or avoiding negatives, that's not a good place to be. You want a philosophy, I think, that is about pursuing values and dealing with the difficulties as they come up. Sure, difficulties are going to come up, and sometimes things are painful. But that's not the focus of life, according to Rand. And you can see this in her fictional characters, in The Fountainhead in particular, Atlas Shrugged, and her other works. They are people who go after values. They take their life seriously, and they charge forward. And as Howard Rourke puts it in The Fountainhead at one point, when he's talking about pain, he says, pain only goes down but so far in him, because he won't let it go any deeper. The most important values, the things that he'll let go deep in his soul, are the good things. And I think that's a good way to think about it. Pain is real, frustration happens, but focus on a philosophy that's all about pursuing values. And the Stoics were a bit mixed on that one. What if the pursuit of a value such as career gets in the way of your overall happiness? Well, if you're pursuing a career that's getting in the way of your happiness, you're probably in the wrong career, and I would just change careers. You want to find a career that you really love. You are going to spend more time engaging in your career than pretty much anything else in your life. So try to find a career you love. I started out in a career in furniture design. I went to fine art school and majored in art with a concentration in furniture design. That was my first career, and I liked it. But when I discovered philosophy and teaching and writing, I loved that more, and I wanted to move to that as a career. So I did. And if I still was doing, if I was still doing furniture design, I don't think I would enjoy that. So if you're in a career you don't enjoy, get out and find your way out of that. And you might not be able to get out immediately. You've got to pay the bills, but figure out. You guys are young enough. Don't get this feeling of, oh, I'm in this thing now, I've got to stay in it. No, you're going to be living for many, many decades, and you can pivot quite easily now. Frankly, you can pivot quite easily when you're 90 if you put your mind to it. So don't ever let your age fool you on that count. What, in your opinion, is the most important virtue? The most important virtue is rationality. Close second is independence. Rationality is the one that says go by reason, right? Reason is so important. It's what we're using to understand everything and judge things right now. You're using your reasoning mind to say, does this guy make any sense? Is this something I should look into? That's good. You should be using that faculty. That's the faculty that helps you to understand what's true. Independence, I would put as the close second, because it can be very easy to get caught up in sort of the froth of other people's opinions, right? And independence is the virtue that is sort of the backstop on that. It says, hey, don't do that. Maintain. Reason is your means of knowledge, and it's your reasoning mind that has to figure things out, not somebody else's reasoning mind. Just because somebody else is giving reasons doesn't mean they're good reasons. You need to use your judgment to figure out whether what I'm saying or Rand is saying or your parents, preachers, or teachers are saying, you have to decide whether you think they're making sense. And that's the virtue of independence. So those are the two I would put very closely together.
What are your thoughts on controlling own emotions and being secure emotionally? Okay, so what are your thoughts on controlling? I think you mean to say your own emotions. Your emotions are not within your immediate control. They are only within your control in this sense. Like, so if your favorite team wins the football game, you can't decide whether you're going to be happy. You just are happy, right? Why? Because it's a preconceived value that you like this team, and the action triggers that, and an emotion is an automatic response to that value and that encounter or that experience, right? And that's what emotions are. They're automatic responses to values in relation to an experience. If your team loses, you feel bad about it, and you can't really help that. Likewise, for the more complex emotions, right? If you're in a relationship with someone and they mistreat you and you feel anger or hurt, right? You can't just go, well, I'm just going to write that off and not feel it, right? That's called repression. You're repressing your emotions. You're pretending that they're not there, and you don't want to do that. Your emotions are really important. They're telling you something about your values in relation to your experiences, and you don't want to misuse them or brush them under the rug. Over time, you can change your emotions, though, and that's in this sense. Your emotions, because they are responses to your values, when you change your values, you change your emotional reactions to things. So I'll give you an example that will sort of tie things up here at the end of this discussion. When I was growing up, I was very altruistic. I thought that being moral meant sacrificially serving other people. All right. I was raised in a society that thought this. My parents taught me this, and pretty much everybody thinks that. And so when I was acting in a sort of a selfish manner, I would feel bad about myself. And when I was acting in a way where I was like sacrificing for others, and I did a lot of this at camp, like I would, go out of my way to do things for other people, even if it was, at my own expense or my own self-interest. And I would do that, and it would feel good because I'd feel like, I'm being a good person. Well, when I discovered these ideas, when I discovered, oh, wait a minute, the whole idea of human sacrifice doesn't make any sense. And it took me a few years to sort of come to terms with this and internalize this new idea. Now, when I'm acting fully self-interestedly and in a principled manner, obviously not in the pretend idea of self-interest, which is stab people in the back to get what you want. That's not real self-interest. That's stupidity and courting disaster in your own life is what that is. Real self-interest is acting in a principled manner to make your life great and respecting others' rights to do the same, right? And now I do that. And when I'm doing that, I feel great about myself. And if I find myself ever, acting in a way that's not in my best interest, because I feel sorry for someone else rather than, going to them and saying, hey, look, I feel sorry for you, so let me give you some advice, right? You can always, there are ways you can help people that are not sacrificial. And when I am living this way now, because my views have changed about philosophy, my emotions are very different than they used to be in these cases, right? So that's an example of how over time you can change your reactions to things by changing the values that you now have internalized. But this doesn't happen quickly. So the questioner's, asking, what about changing your emotions? And in the sense that of trying to do that in any immediate way, you just can't do it. And you just have to take your emotions for what they are, learn from them. If you feel bad when somebody has treated you unjustly, that's a good thing. You're supposed to feel bad when somebody has treated you unjustly. That's a good sign. If it doesn't bother you when somebody has treated you unjustly, that's probably a problem. That's probably something you need to think about, and you need to be, so you get the idea. Your emotions are important indicators of what's going on in your soul and in your values. How can you avoid pain? If by that you mean like physical pain, don't put your hand on the burner, right? But emotional pain, there's going to be pain in life, and I wouldn't make a big deal of avoiding it. Instead, pursue values that will fill your life with joy. And then pain becomes a secondary thing in life. And there's some of it here and there, but it's not going to haunt you as much. In your teenage years, you're going to feel a lot of frustration and maybe pain because you're still trying to figure out how relationships work, and you're still trying to figure out how to become independent. And maybe your parents are pressuring you this way and your peers are pressuring you that way. So there's going to be some frustration there. And this is why learning the virtues, particularly virtue of independence, independent thinking is so important, because in time, as you do gain this sort of autonomy and become fully your own person and choose your own values and pursue those values, life starts to take off in a beautiful way if you do that. And a little bit of pain along the way, sure. I've had some pain. I've had some painful relationships. I've had some people treat me unjustly. It happens, but vast majority of my life living this way is not painful. It's mostly just wonderful. So live philosophically, think philosophically, live a philosophic life, and you'll live a good life. And make sure that the philosophy you accept makes sense. Whether it's Rand's or anybody else's, just make sure it makes sense to you. Okay, I think we're a few minutes over, so we've only got 2 questions. I'll go ahead and take them unless somebody insists that I not. What is your advice for me? Because I don't really know which career I really want. You've got to try different things, right? Go out and see if you can get someone to let you sit in his or her office and do the kind of work that he does. Maybe I have a friend who's a realtor, and if somebody asked her, hey, could I come drive around with you and see what a realtor does for the day, I'm sure she'd say yes. If somebody lived near me and said, hey, I'd like to see what it's like to be a writer and a teacher for a day, can I come shadow in your office and see what you do, I would say yes, right? So people are happy to help with those kinds of things typically. So if there's a career you think you might be interested in, go knock on some doors, make some phone calls, send an email or 2, and ask someone, hey, can I come have a conversation with you? I'd like to find out what it's like to be a lawyer. I'd like to find out what it's like to run a small business, right? Or whatever. Because you can't figure out what you want to do by just sitting in a chair and closing your eyes and saying, what do I want to do, right? Knowledge comes from experience. And so you've got to go out and do things. And when you do, you'll start to learn the kinds of things that you want to do. Lastly, what are your thoughts on nihilism? So nihilism is used in different ways. And so I want to be clear about what I mean by it. Sometimes nihilism is used to mean that you don't think that there's any such thing as truth or value. Particularly, it's often used in the realm of ethics for somebody who says there's no such thing as an objective standard of value, that it's all just opinion. So values are just completely subjective. They're nil. Right, there's zero. That's where the nihilism. There's zero standard for this. It's just all made up. And then sometimes nihilism is meant more, and I think this is the more accurate meaning of it in philosophy, to mean that it's someone who is against values, someone who is who wants to harm values, harm the good for being good. And Rand actually spoke of this herself. She thought that nihilism was hatred of the good for being good. And in that sense, so I'll take the latter sense, hatred of the good for being good, or actually attacking the good for being good. That's just horrible. That's like the most evil thing I can imagine, right? It's completely anti-life. The good, properly speaking, I think, is that which is good for human life. We want to live beautiful lives, and we want to try to live in harmony to the extent we can. We want to live free so that nobody's bossing us around and telling us how we have to live. That's all the good. And then all of the virtues and values we have to summon and use to live that kind of life, that's all the good. If someone comes in and tries to destroy that in some way, that's just pure evil. I mean, that's what, well, and it happened. Look, and 9/11 was precisely that. Here are these happy people trying to live beautiful lives in New York City, and these religious nihilists came in and said, we're going to wipe this thing out. And look what happened. So nihilism in that sense is really bad. Nihilism in the sense that you don't understand how morality can be objective or how values can be objective, that can be a completely innocent, lack of understanding. Most people don't know how values can be objective. Most people haven't read Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand is the only philosopher that I know of who has spelled out how it is that values are objective and why they're objective, and has pointed to the evidence to support that. So most of the world, even if they wouldn't acknowledge it, most of the world is on the premise that values really can't be grounded in facts, because they don't know how to do it. I mean, you can think that they should be able to be grounded in facts. That's a healthy thing to think. But if you don't know how they're actually grounded in facts, then you're not aware of how morality is objective either. So in that sense, when nihilism is used in that sense, it can be a perfectly innocent thing to be in that position, and I wouldn't be critical of that at all. But there's a big difference between those two meanings of nihilism, and so. Okay, that's it. I'll just say a few closing words about further places to study. I highly recommend that if you found this an interesting conversation, you look more into this. You can read Ayn Rand's books. That's the best place to start to learn about her ideas. Her fiction is absolutely wonderful. The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, We the Living, which, believe it or not, even in my 30 years of studying this stuff, I still have not read We the Living because I can't. Every time it's a depressing book, and I know I've heard what happens in it, and every time I try to read it, I get too depressed and I stop. So, but I recommend it because all of my friends have read it and they say it's fabulous. So there's that. Her nonfiction, especially Philosophy Who Needs It and The Virtue of Selfishness and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, are the three that I would recommend there. My book, Loving Life, I've already mentioned. Another book I wrote is titled Rational Egoism, Philosophy for Flourishing, or The Morality for Human Flourishing, I believe is the subtitle. You can find both of those at Amazon. And then I really recommend that you check out Objective Standard Institute, which is a relatively new institute that my wife and I and a wonderful team started about a year ago. And we teach courses on all sorts of things there from a philosophic perspective. There are courses on entrepreneurship. There are courses on how to find and generate opportunity in life. There are courses on how philosophy integrates with economics. There are courses on writing, how to write powerfully in defense of liberty. We've got a whole roster of courses. And some of the courses there are introductions to Ayn Rand's philosophy or elaborations on Ayn Rand's philosophy, and some of those are taught by me. Full scholarships to those courses are available for students. So if you go over there and look around for the scholarships, you can find those. So you can get into these courses free of charge. And I think you'll find that stuff really interesting. So I highly recommend that. And lastly, if you have any questions for me, you're welcome to email them to me. I get a lot of emails, so it might take me a while, but I do answer them all. And my email is craig@objectivestandard.org. craig@objectivestandard.org. Thank you guys. Your questions have been wonderful. I could go for another hour, but I know we're already over and I'm probably going to get in trouble for that. So we'll call it quits now. Keep living philosophically, keep thinking, and remember, your life belongs to you, and your mind is your only way to figure out what's true and false and good and bad. Love your lives.